Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mir, ni hao, buenos dias, buenos tardes, eseche, aquaba, welcoming, what up though? This is Café Mélangé, and it is week 44, yo pongo. Y we're changing it up a wee bit. I said before that the routine is being changed, particularly because of rations status at the moment here at the ashram. So my weekly rounds amidst the forest are adjusted accordingly. That means Tuesdays, camping it here in the village. So continuing with the Café Mélangé, God willing, but just doing it here. Now maybe here in the ashram, right outside the ashram, or nearby somewhere in the village. Today it's here because we got things to do and just working on like maximizing stability amidst the adjustments. So already this is a number of hours after the intended schedule, which intends to be noon, and additionally there's adjustments with the formatting, meaning that rather than me just giving rants or spiels or whatever else, I'm just telling stories. How about that? I talk about stories. How about telling stories? So, and I do that a while ago, sharing stories, reading. I was reading excerpts from short stories and autobiographic briefs from mixed brethren. I did that at the beginning of this series, nearly a year ago. Actually, that's I was doing it on a daily basis, Monday through Thursday. I think I was, if I can recall correctly. And then it kind of like progressed into spiels. So now we're returning to stories, and these are stories that I shared before. On a weekly basis, we got enough for many weeks. See how that rolls. Might get some new stories. Many of these stories, it's been a while since I've shared or read or told, and I'm reading these stories rather than telling these stories, because that requires less energy and concentration from my part. So particularly amidst the established audience at the moment, this is what I share, and there may be there's propensity for others, for me to tell stories, for others to tell stories, for people to suggest stories, and additionally, but for the moment, this is what we got. Now, that being said, we're getting into it. This story today is the tale of Nur al-Din and his son Badr al-Din Hassan. So this is actually a long story. It's probably one of the longest ones in this immediate collection. I share with you the title of the collection. Haha. Well, it just so happens that the page is a wee bit loose. This is a project we complete a year ago. And then this is the table of contents. I don't know how visible that is, but so that's the stories we got for this joint. Haha, how about I done left the page of reference. So there it is. This is another collection of stories that we have. So we got a few stories, enough probably for at least half a year of weeks of storytelling. And then there's a whole library of stories that I have yet to read, that come from. These are selected from that library. So I've read some of those stories, and these are selected from that, but there's still a lot that I have yet to read. Anyway, we got stories. Tale of Nur al-Din and his son Badr al-Din Hassan. These come from the collection of the Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights, which is classic, well-known collection of stories, particularly short stories, and it in and of itself is a story of how these stories are shared. But rather than getting into all that, I'm just going to get into this story. I will say this, just as to take off pressure for myself and to be less self-conscious. It's been a while since I read this. It's been a while since I shared this, so we'll see how it goes. Modest expectations. If you're looking to be dazzled, you might be looking elsewhere. So, that being said, here we go. or is that reverse psychology? Is that something else? Whatever. Here we go. Tale of Nur al-Din and his son, Badr al-Din Hassan. Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that in times of yore the land of Egypt was ruled by a sultan, endowed with justice and generosity, one who loved the pious poor and companied with the ulema. This problem is ulema and learned men. And he had a wazir, a wise and experienced, well versed in affairs and in the art of government. This minister, who was a very old man, had 2 sons, as they were two moons. Never man saw the like of them for beauty and grace. The elder called Shams al-Din Muhammad, and the younger Nur al-Din Ali. But the younger excelled the elder in seemliness and pleasing semblance, so that folk heard his fame in distant countries, and men flocked to Egypt for the purpose of seeing him. In course of time, therefore, the wazir died, and was deeply regretted and grieved by the sultan, who sent for his 2 sons, and investing them with the dresses of honor, said to them, Let not your hearts be troubled, for ye shall stand in your far stead, and be joint ministers of Egypt. At this they rejoiced and kissed the ground before him, and performed the ceremonial grieving for their far during a full month. After which time they entered upon the wazirate, and the power passed into the hands as it had been in the hands into their hands as it had been in the hands of their far, each doing duty for a week at a time. They lived under the same roof, and their word was one. And whenever the sultan desired to travel, they took it by turns to be in attendance on him. It fortuned one night that the sultan purposed setting out on a journey next matin, the next day, and the elder, whose turn it was to accompany him, was sitting conversing with his brother, and said to him, O my brother, it is my wish that we both marry, I and thou, 2 sisters, and go into our wives one on one and the same night. Do, O my brother, as thou desirest, the younger replied, for right is thy recking, and surely I will comply with thee in whatso thou sayest. So they agreed upon this, and quoth Shams al-Din, If Allah decree that we marry 2 damsels, and go into them on the same night, and they shall conceive on their bride night, and bear children to us on the same day, and by Allah's will thy wife bear thee a son, and my wife bear me a daughter, let us wed them either to other, for they will be cousins. Quoth Nur al-Din, O my brother Shams al-Din, what dower wilt thou require from my son for thy daughter? Quoth Shams al-Din, I will take 3,000 dinars, and three pleasure gardens, and 3 agricultural plots, and it would not be seemly that the youth make contract for less than this. When Nur al-Din heard such demand, he said, What manner of dower is this thou wouldest impose upon my son? Wottest thou not that we are brothers, and both by Allah's grace wazirs, and equal in office? It behooveth thee to offer thy daughter to my son without marriage settlement, or, if one need be, it should represent a mere nominal value, by way of show to the world. For thou knowest that the masculine is worthier than the feminine, and my son is a male, and our memory will be preserved by him, not by thy daughter. But what, said Shams al-Din, is she to have? And Nur al-Din continued, Through her we shall not be remembered amongst the emirs of the earth. But I see thou wouldst do with me according to the saying, and thou wouldst bluff of a buyer, ask him high price and higher. Or as did a man who, they say, went to a friend and asked something of him, being in necessity, and was answered, Bismillah, in the name of Allah, I will do all what thou requirest, but come mañana. Whereupon the other replied in this verse, When he who is asked a favor saith mañana, the wise man wots 'tis vain to beg or borrow. Quoth Shams al-Din, Basta, I see thee fail in respect to me by making thy son of further account than my daughter, and 'tis plain that thine understanding is of the meanest, and that thou lackest manners. Thou remindest me of thy partnership in the wazirate, when I admitted thee to share with me only in pity for thee, and not wishing to devastate thee, and that thou mightest help me as a manner of assistant. But since thou takest on this wise, by Allah, I'm pause here. when they're invoking God, I'm going to be mindful of that and uh, state something else, just because that's my personal discipline. So, by word, I will never marry my daughter to thy son. No, not for her weight in gold. When Nur al-Din heard his brother's words, he waxed wroth and said, And I too, I will never, never marry my son to thy daughter. No, not to keep from my lips the cup of death. Shams al-Din replied, I would not accept him as a husband for her, and he is not worth a paring of her nail. Were I not about to travel, I would make an example of thee. However, when I return, thou shalt see, and I will show thee how I can assert my dignity and vindicate my honor. But by word doeth whatso will. When Nur al-Din heard this speech from his brother, he was filled with fury and lost his wits for rage. But he hid what he felt and held his peace. And each of the brothers passed the night in a place distantly apart, wild with wrath against the other. As soon as the day dawned, the Sultan fared forth in state and crossed over from Cairo to Jizza, and made for the pyramids, accompanied by the Wazir Shams al-Din, whose turn of duty it was, whilst his brother Nur al-Din, who passed the night in sore rage, rose with the light and prayed the dawn prayer. Then he betook himself to his treasury, and taking a small pair of saddlebags, filled them with gold. And he called to mind his brother's threats and the contempt wherewith he had treated him, and he repeated these couplets: Travel, and thou shalt find new friends, for old ones left behind. Toil, for the sweets of human life by toil and moil are found. The stay at home no honor wins, nor aught attains but want. So leave thy place of birth and wander all the world around. I've seen, and very oft I've seen, how standing water stinks, and only flowing sweetens it, and trotting makes it sound. And were the moon forever full, and never to wax or wane, man would not strain his watchful eyes to see its gladsome round. Except the lion leave his lair, he never would fell his game. Except the arrow leave the bow, never had it reached its bound. Gold dust is dust whilst it lies untravelled in the mind, and aloes wood mere fuel is upon its native ground. And gold shall win his highest worth when from his goal ungold, and aloes sent to foreign parts grows costlier than gold. When he ended his verse, he bade one of his pages saddle him his Nubian mule, and her padded cell. Now she was a dapple gray, with ears like reed pens, and legs like columns, and a back high and strong as a dome builded on pillars. Her saddle was of gold cloth, and her stirrups of Indian steel, and her housing of Ispahan velvet. She had trappings which would serve the Chosroes, and she was like a bride adorned for her wedding night. Further, he bade lay on her back a portion of silk for a seat, and a prayer carpet under which were his saddlebags. When this was done, he said to his pages and slaves, I purpose going forth a pleasuring outside the city on the road to Kalyub town, and I shall be 3 nights abroad, so let none of you follow me, for there is something straiteneth my breast. Then he mounted the mule in haste, and taking with him some provant for the way, set out from Cairo, and faced the open and uncultivated country lying around it. About noontide he entered Bilbay's city, where he dismounted and stayed a while to rest himself and his mule, and ate some of his victual. He bought at Bilbay's all he wanted for himself, and foraged for his mule, and then fared on the way of the waste. Towards nightfall he entered a town called Sa'adiyah, where he alighted and took out somewhat of his veticum, and ate. Then he spread his strip of silk on the sand, and set the saddlebags under his head, and slept in the open air, for he was still overcome with anger. When the day dawned, he mounted and rode onwards till he reached the holy city Yerushalayim, and thence he made Aleppo, where he dismounted at one of the caravanserais, and abode there 3 days to rest himself and the mule, and to smell the air. Then, being determined to travel distantly, and having ridden safely in his fate, he set out again, mending without wotting whither he was going. And having fallen in with certain couriers, he stayed not travelling till he had reached Basra city, albeit he knew not what the place was. It was dark night when he alighted at the Khan, so he spread out his prayer carpet, and took down the saddlebags from the back of the mule, and gave her with her furniture in charge of the doorkeeper, that he might walk her about. The man took her and did as he was bid. Now it so happened that the Wazir of Basra, a man shot in years, was sitting at the lattice window of his palace opposite the Khan, and he saw the porter walking the mule up and down. He was struck by her trappings of price, and thought her a nice beast fit for the riding of wazirs or even of royalties. And the further he looked, the further was he perplexed, till at last he said to one of his pages, "Bring hither young doorkeeper." The page went and returned to the wazir with the porter, who kissed the ground between his hands. And the minister asked him, "Who is the owner of yonder mule, and what manner of man is he?" And he answered, "O my master, the owner of this mule is a comely young man of pleasant manners, withal grave and dignified, a doubtless one of the sons of the merchants." When the wazir heard the doorkeeper's words, he arose forthright, and mounting his horse, rode to the Khan and went in to Nur ad-Din, who, seeing the minister making towards him, rose to his feet and advanced to meet him and saluted him. The wazir welcomed him to Basra, and dismounting embraced him and made him sit down by his side and said, "O my son, whence comest thou, and what dost thou seek?" "O my master," Nur ad-Din replied, I have come from Cairo city, of which my father was whilom wazir, but he hath been removed by the grace of God." And he informed him of all that had befallen him from beginning to end, adding, "I am resolved never to return home before I have seen all the cities and countries of the world." When the wazir heard this, he said to him, "O my son, hearken not to the voice of passion, lest it cast thee into the pit. For indeed many regions be waste places, and I fear for thee the turns of time." Then he let load the saddlebags and the silk and prayer carpets on the mule, and carried Nur ad-Din to his own house, where he lodged him in a pleasant place, and entreated him honorably, and made much of him, for he inclined to love him with exceeding love. After a while he said to him, "O my son, here I am left a man in years, and have no male children. But God hath blessed me with a daughter, who eveneth thee in beauty, and I have rejected all her many suitors, men of rank and substance. But affection for thee hath entered into my heart. Say me then, wilt thou be to her a husband? If thou accept this, I will go with thee to the Sultan of Basra, and will tell him that thou art my nephew, the son of my brother, and bring thee to be appointed wazir in my place, that I may keep the house. For by grace, O my son, I am stricken in years and aweary." When Nur ad-Din heard the wazir's words, he bowed his head in modesty and said, "To hear is to obey." At this the wazir rejoiced and bade his servants prepare a feast and decorate the great assembly hall wherein they were wont to celebrate the marriages of emirs and grandees. Then he assembled his friends and the notables of the reign and the merchants of Basra, and when all stood before him, he said to them, "I had a brother who was wazir in the land of Egypt, and by grace blessed him with 2 sons, whilst to me, as well we wot, I have been given a daughter. My brother charged me to marry my daughter to one of his sons, whereto I assented, and when my daughter was of age to marry, he sent me one of his sons to the young man now present, to whom I purpose marrying her, drawing up the contract and celebrating the night of unveiling with due ceremony. For he is nearer and dearer to me than a stranger, and after the wedding, if he please, he shall abide with me, or if he desire to travel, I will forward him and his wife to his father's home." Hereat one and all replied, "Right is thy recking." And they looked at the bridegroom and were pleased with him. So the wazir sent for the qazi and legal witnesses, and they wrote out the marriage contract, after which the slaves perfumed the guests with incense and served them with sherbet of sugar and sprinkled rose water on them, and all went their ways. Then the wazir bade his servants take Nur ad-Din to hammam baths, and sent him a suite of the best of his own special raiment, and napkins and towels and bowls and perfume burners and all else that was required. And after the bath he came out and donned the dress. He was even as the full moon on the 14th night, and he mounted his mule and stayed not till he reached the wazir's palace. There he dismounted and went in to the minister and kissed his hands, and the wazir bade him welcome, saying, "Arise and go into thy wife this night, and on the mañana I will carry thee to the sultan, and pray thee with all manner of weal." So Nur ad-Din left him and went in to his wife, the wazir's daughter. Thus much concerning him, but as regards his elder brother, Shams al-Din, he was absent with the sultan a long time. And when he returned from his journey, he found not his brother. And he asked of his servants and slaves, who answered, On the day of thy departure with the Sultan, thy brother mounted his mule, fully caparisoned as for state procession, saying, I am going towards Kalyub town, and I shall be absent 1 day, or at most 2 days, for my breast is straitened, and let none of you follow me. Then he fared forth, and from that time to this we have heard no tidings of him. Shams al-Din was greatly troubled at the sudden disappearance of his brother, and grieved with exceeding grief at the loss, and said to himself, This is only because I chided and upbraided him the night before my departure with the Sultan. Happily his feelings were hurt, and he fared forth a-travelling, but I must send after him. Then he went into the Sultan and acquainted him with what had happened, and wrote letters and dispatches, which he sent by running footmen to his deputies in every province. But during the 20 days of his brother's absence, Nur al-Din had travelled distantly and had reached Basra. So after diligent search, the messengers failed to come at any news of him and return. Thereupon Shams al-Din despaired of finding his brother, and said, Indeed, I went beyond all bounds in what I said to him, and with reference to the marriage of our children, would that I had not done so. This all cometh of my lack of wit and want of caution. Soon after this he sought in marriage the daughter of a Cairene merchant, and drew up the marriage contract and went into her. And it so chanced that on the very same night when Shams al-Din went into his wife, Nur al-Din also went into his wife, the daughter of the Wazir of Basra, this being in accordance with the will, that the will might deal the decrees of destiny to God's creatures. Further, it was as the two brothers had said, for their two wives became pregnant by them on the same night, and both were brought to bed on the same day. The wife of Shams al-Din, Wazir of Egypt, of a daughter, never in Cairo was seen a fairer, and the wife of Nur al-Din, of a son, none further beautiful was ever seen in his time. As one of the poets said concerning the like of him, that jetty hair, that glossy brow, my slender-waisted youth of thine, can darkness round creation throw, or make it brightly shine? The dusky mole that faintly shows upon his cheek, ah, blame it not, the tulip flower never blows undarkened by its spot. They named the boy Badr al-Din Hassan, and his grandfather, the Wazir of Basra, rejoiced in him, and on the 7th day after his birth made entertainments and spread banquets, which would befit the birth of kings' sons and heirs. Then he took Nur al-Din and went up with him to the Sultan, and his son-in-law, when he came before the presence of the king, kissed the ground between his hands and repeated these verses, for he was ready of speech, firm of sprite, and benevolent in heart, and he was well informed. The world's best joys long be thy lot, my master, and lost whilst darkness and the dawn overlap. O thou who makest, when we greet thy gifts, the world to dance and time his palms to clap. Then the Sultan rose up to honor them, and thanking Nur al-Din for his fine compliment, asked the Wazir, Who may be this young man? And the minister answered, This is my brother's son, and related his tale from first to last. Quoth the Sultan, And how comes he to be thy nephew, and we have never heard speak of him? Quoth the minister, O our master, the Sultan, I had a brother who was Wazir in the land of Egypt, and he died, leaving 2 sons, whereof the elder hath taken his father's place, and the younger whom thou seest came to me. I had sworn I would not marry my daughter to any but him, so when he came I married him to her. Now he is young, and I am old. My hearing is dulled, and my judgment is easily fooled. Wherefore I would solicit our master the Sultan to set him in my stead, for he is my brother's son and my daughter's husband, and he is fit for the Wazirate, being a man of benevolent counsel and ready contrivance. The Sultan looked at Nur al-Din and liked him, and so he established him in office as the Wazir had requested, and formally appointed him, presenting him with a splendid dress of honor and a she-mule from his private stud, and assigning to him sold stipends and supplies. Nur al-Din kissed the Sultan's hand and went home, he and his father-in-law joying with exceeding joy, and saying, All this followeth on the heels of the boy Hassan's birth. Next day he presented himself before the king, and kissing the ground began repeating, Grow thy weal and thy well-being day by day, and thy luck prevail over the envier's spite, and ne'er cease thy days to be white as day, and the foreman's day to be black as night. The Sultan bade him be seated on the Wazir's seat, so he sat down and applied himself to the business of his office, and went into the cases of the lieges and their suits, as is the wont of ministers, whilst the Sultan watched him and wondered at his wit and benevolent sense, judgment, and insight. Wherefore he loved him and took him into intimacy. When the divan was dismissed, Nur al-Din returned to his house and related what had passed to his father-in-law, who rejoiced. And thenceforward Nur al-Din ceased not so to administer the Wazirate, that the Sultan would not be parted from him night or day, and increased his stipends and supplies till his means were ample, and he became the owner of ships that made trading voyages at his command, as well as of Mamelukes and Blackamoors slaves. and he laid out many estates and set up Persian wheels and planted gardens. When his son Hassan was 4 years of age, the old wazir deceased, and he made for his father-in-law a sumptuous funeral ceremony ere he was laid in the dust. Then he occupied himself with the education of his son, and when the boy waxed strong and came to the age of 7, he brought him a fakir, a doctor of law and religion, to teach him in his own house, and charged him to give him a benevolent education and instruct him in politeness and benevolent manners. So the tutor made the boy read and retain all varieties of useful knowledge, and he had spent some years in learning the Quran by heart, and he ceased not to grow in beauty and stature and symmetry. The professor brought him up in his father's palace, teaching him reading, writing, and ciphering, theology, and Bell's letters. His grandfather, the old wazir, had bequeathed to him the whole of his property when he was but 4 years of age. Now during all the time of his earliest youth he had never left the house, till on a certain day his father, the wazir Nur al-Din, clad him in his best clothes, and mounting him on a she-mule of the finest, went up with him to the sultan. The king gazed at Badr al-Din Hassan, and marveled at his comeliness, and loved him. As for the city folk, when they first passed before them with his far, they marveled at his exceeding beauty, and sat down on the road expecting his return, that they might look their fill on his beauty and loveliness and symmetry and perfect grace. And they blessed him aloud as he passed, and called upon God, Allah, to bless him. The sultan entreated the lad with special favor, and said to his far, O wazir, thou must needs bring him daily to my presence. Whereupon he replied, I hear and I obey. I hear and I obey. Then the wazir returned home with his son, and ceased not to carry him to court till he reached the age of 20. At that time the minister sickened, and sending for Badr al-Din Hassan, said to him, Know, O my son, that the world of the present is but a house of temporariness, whilst that the future is a house of eternity. I wish before I die to bequeath thee certain charges, and do thou take heed of what I say, and incline thy words to my heart. And incline thy heart to my words. Then he gave him his last instructions as to the properest way of dealing with his neighbors and the due management of his affairs. After which he called to mind his brother and his home and his native land, and he wept over his separation from those he had first loved. Then he wiped away his tears, and turning to his son, he said to him, Before I proceed, O my son, to my last charges and injunctions, then know that I have a brother, and thou hast an uncle, Shams al-Din, the wazir of Cairo, with whom I parted, leaving him against his will. Now take thee a sheet of paper, and write upon it whatso I say to thee. Badr al-Din took a fair leaf, and set about doing his father's bidding, and he wrote thereon a full account of what had happened to his sire, first and last, the dates of his arrival at Basra, and of his foregathering with the wazir, of his marriage, of his going into the minister's daughter, and the birth of his son. Brief his life of 40 years from the day of his dispute with his brother, adding the words, And this is written at my dictation, and may the Most High be with him when I am gone. Then he folded the paper and sealed it, and said, O Hassan, O my son, keep this paper with all care, for it will enable thee to establish thine origin and rank and lineage. And if anything contrary befall thee, set out for Cairo, and ask for thine uncle, and show him this paper, and say to him that I died a stranger distantly from mine own people, and full of yearning to see him and them. So Badr al-Din Hassan took the document, and folded it, and wrapping it in a portion of waxed cloth, sewed it like a talisman between the inner and outer cloth of his skullcap, and wound his light turban round it. And he fell to weeping over his far, and at parting with him, and he but a boy. Then Nur al-Din lapsed into a swoon, the forerunner of death. But presently recovering himself, he said, O Hassan, O my son, I will now bequeath to thee 5 last behests. The first behest is, Be over intimate with none, nor frequent any, nor be familiar with any. So shalt thou be safe from his mischief. For security lieth in seclusion of thought, and a certain retirement from the society of thy fellows. And I have heard it said by a poet, In this world there is none thou mayest count upon to befriend thy case in the neck of need. So live for thyself, nursing hope of none. Such counsel I give thee, and now take heed. The second behest is, O my son, deal harshly with none, lest fortune with thee deal hardly. For the fortune of this world is one day with thee, and another day against thee. And all worldly benefits are but alone to be repaid. And I have heard a poet say, take thought nor haste to will the thing thou wilt. Have wrath on man, for wrath thou mayest require. No hand is there but the Most High's hand is higher. No tyrant but shall rule worse tyrant's ire. The third behest is, learn to be silent in society, and let thine own faults distract thine attention from the faults of other men. For it is said, in silence dwelleth safety. And thereon I have heard the lines that tell us, reserves a jewel, silent safety is. Whenas thou speakest, many a word be withhold, and of silence thou repent thee once. Of speech thou shalt repent times manyfold. The fourth behest, O my son, is, beware of wine bibbing. For wine is the head of all frowardness, and a fine solvent of human wits. So shun, and again I say, shun mixing strong liquor. For I have heard a poet say, from wine I turn, and whoso wine cups swill, becoming one of those who deem it ill. Wine driveth man to miss salvation way, and opes the gate wide to sins that kill. The fifth behest, O my son, is, keep thy wealth, and it will keep thee. Guard thy money, and it will guard thee. And waste not thy substance, lest haply thou come to want, and must fare begging from the meanest of mankind. Save thy dirhams, and deem them the sovereignty's salve for the wounds of the world. And here again I have heard that one of the poets said, when fails my wealth, no friend will deign befriend. When wealth abounds, all friends their friendship tender. How many friends lent aid my wealth to spend, but friends to lack of wealth no friendship render. On this wise Nur al-Din ceased not to counsel his son Badr al-Din Hasan till his hour came, and sighing one sobbing sigh, his life went forth. Then the voice of grieving and keening rose high in his house, and the Sultan and all the grandees grieved for him and buried him. But his son ceased not lamenting his loss for 2 months, during which he never mounted a horse, nor attended the divan, nor presented himself before the Sultan. At last the king, being wroth with him, established in his stead one of his chamberlains, and made him wazir, giving orders to seize and set seals on Nur al-Din's houses and supplies and domains. So the new wazir went forth with a mighty posse of chamberlains and people of the divan, and watchmen, and a host of idlers, to do this, and to seize Badr al-Din Hasan, and carry him before the king, who would deal with him as he deemed fit. Now there was amongst the crowd of followers a Mamaluk of the deceased wazir, who, when he had heard this order, urged his horse and rode at full speed to the house of Badr al-Din Hasan, for he could not endure to see the ruin of his old master's son. He found him sitting at the gate with his head hung down, and sorrowing as was his wont, for the loss of his far. So he dismounted, and kissing his hand, said to him, O my master, O son of my master, haste ere ruin come and laid waste. When Hasan heard this, he trembled and asked, what may be the matter? And the man answered, the Sultan is angered with thee, and hath issued a warrant against thee, and evil cometh hard upon my track, so flee with thy life. At these words Hasan's heart flamed with the fire of bale, and his rose-red cheek turned pale. And he said to the Mamaluk, O my brother, is there time for me to go in and get some worldly gear, which may stand me instead during my strangerhood? But the slave replied, O my master, up at once, and save thyself, and leave this house whilst it is yet time. And he quoted these lines, escape with thy life if oppression betide thee, and let the house tell of its builder's fate. Country for country thou'lt find, if thou seek it, life for life, never early or late. It is strange men should dwell in the house of abjection, when the plain of the Most High's earth is so wide and so great. At these words of the Mamaluk, Badr al-Din covered his head with the skirt of his garment, and went forth on foot till he stood outside of the city, where he heard folk saying, the Sultan hath sent his new wazir to the house of the old wazir, now no further, to seal his property, and seize his son Badr al-Din Hasan, and take him before the presence, that he may put him to death. And all cried, alas for his beauty and his loveliness. When he heard this, he fled forth at hazard, knowing not whither he was going, and gave not over, hurrying onwards till destiny drove him to his father's tomb. So he entered the cemetery, and threading his way through the graves, at last he reached the sepulchre, where he sat down and let fall from his head the skirt of his long robe, which was made of brocade with a gold embroidered hem, whereon were worked these radiant east tells of the stars of heaven and bounteous dews. Endure thine honor to the latest day, and time thy growth of glory never refuse. Whilst he was sitting by his father's tomb, behold, there came to him a Jewish brother, as he was a shroff, a money changer, with a pair of saddlebags containing much gold, who accosted him and kissed his hand, saying, Whither bound, O my master? 'Tis late in the day, and thou art clad but lightly, and I read signs of trouble in thy face. I was sleeping within this very hour, answered Hassan, when my far appeared to me, and chid me for not having visited his tomb. So I awoke trembling and came hither forthright, lest the day should go by without my visiting him, which would have been grievous to me. O my master, rejoined the Jewish brother, thy far had many merchantmen at sea, and as some of them are now due, it is my wish to buy of thee the cargo of the ship that cometh into port with this 1,000 dinars of gold. I consent, quoth Hassan, whereupon the Jewish brother took out a bag full of gold and counted out 1,000 sequins, which he gave to Hassan, the son of the wazir, saying, Write me a letter of sale and seal it. So Hassan took a pen and paper and wrote these words in duplicate. The writer Hassan Badr al-Din, son of Wazir Nur al-Din, hath sold to Isaac the Jewish brother all the cargo of the first of his far ships, which cometh into port for 1,000 dinars, and he hath received the price in advance. And after he had taken one copy, the Jewish brother put it into his pouch and went away, but Hassan fell a-weeping, as he thought of the dignity and prosperity which had erst been his, and night came upon him. So he leant his head against his father's grave, and sleep overcame him. Glory to the Most High, who sleepeth not. He ceased not slumbering till the moon rose, when his head slipped from off the tomb, and he lay on his back, with his limbs outstretched, his face shining bright in the moonlight. Now the cemetery was haunted day and night by jinns who were of the true believers, and presently came out Jinniya, who, seeing Hassan asleep, marveled at his beauty and loveliness, and cried, Glory to the Most High. This youth can be none other than one of the Woden of paradise. Then she flew furtherwards to circle it, as was her custom, and met an Ifrit on the wing, who saluted her, and said to him, Whence comest thou? From Cairo, he replied. Wilt thou come with me and look upon the beauty of a youth who sleepeth in yonder burial place? She asked. And he answered, I will. So they flew till they lighted at the tomb, and she showed him the youth, and said, Now didst thou ever in thy born days see aught like this? The Ifrit looked upon him and exclaimed, Praise to the Most High that hath no equal. O my sister, shall I tell thee of what I have seen this day? Asked she, What is that? And he answered, I have seen the counterpart of this youth in the land of Egypt. She is the daughter of the Wazir Shams al-Din, and she is a model of beauty and loveliness, of fairest favor and formous form, and dight with symmetry and perfect grace. When she had reached the age of 19, the Sultan of Egypt heard of her, and sending for the Wazir her far, said to him, Hear me, O Wazir, it hath reached mine ear that thou hast a daughter, and I wish to demand her of thee in marriage. The Wazir replied, our master, the Sultan, then accept my excuses and take compassion on my sorrows. For thou knowest that my brother, who was partner with me in the Wazirat, disappeared from amongst us many years ago, and he wot not where he is, and we wot not where he is. Now the cause of his departure was that one night, as we were sitting together and talking of wives and children to come, we had words on the matter, and he went off in high dudgeon. But I swore that I would marry my daughter to none save to the son of my brother on the day her Moor gave her birth, which was nigh upon 19 years ago. I have lately heard that my brother died at Basra, where he had married the daughter of the Wazir, and that she bare him a son, and I will not marry my daughter but to him in honor of my brother's memory. I recorded the date of my marriage and the conception of my wife and the birth of my daughter, and from her horoscope I find that her name is conjoined with that of her cousin, and there are damsels in Foizan for our master the Sultan. The king, hearing his minister's answer and refusal, waxed wroth with exceeding wrath, and cried, When the like of me asketh a girl in marriage of the like of thee, he conferreth an honor, and thou rejectest me and puttest me off with cold excuses. Now by the life of my head, I will marry her to the meanest of my men, and in spite of the nose of thee. There was in the palace a horse groom, which was a gobbo, with a bunch to his breast and a hunch to his back. And the Sultan sent for him, and married him to the daughter of the Wazir, Life or Loth, and hath ordered a pompous marriage procession for him, and that he go into his bride this very night. I have now just flown hither from Cairo, where I left the hunchback at the door of the hammam bath, amidst the Sultan's white slaves, who were waving lighted flambeaux about him. As for the minister's daughter, she sitteth amongst her nurses and tirewomen, weeping and wailing, for they have forbidden her far to come near her. Never have I seen, O my sister, a further hideous being than this hunchback, whilst the young lady is the likest of all folk to this young man, albeit even fairer than he. At this the Jinniya cried at him, Thou liest, this young youth is handsomer than any one of his day. The Ifrit gave her the eye, again adding, By the Most High, O my sister, the damsel I speak of is fairer than this. Yet none but he deserveth her, for they resemble each other like brother and sister, or at least cousins. And well away how she is wasted upon that hunchback. Then said she, O my brother, let us get under him, and lift him up, and carry him to Cairo, that we may compare him with the damsel of whom thou speakest, and so determine whether of the twain is the fair. To hear is to obey, he replied. Thou speakest to the point, nor is there a righter recking than this of thine, and I myself will carry him. So I raised him from the ground, and flew with him like a bird soaring in upper air, the Ifritah keeping close by his side at equal speed, till he alighted with him in the city of Cairo. And he set him down on the stone bench, and woke him up, and roused him, and finding that he was no longer at his father's tomb in Basra city, he looked right and left, and saw that he was in a strange place, and he would have cried out, but the Ifrit gave him a cuff which persuaded him to keep silence. Then he brought him rich raiment, and clothed him therein, and giving him a lighted flambeau, said, Know that I have brought thee hither, meaning to do thee a benevolent turn for the love of the Most High. So take this torch, and mingle with the people at the hammam door, and walk on with them without stopping, till thou reach the house of the wedding festival. Then go boldly forward, and enter the great saloon, and fear none, but take thy stand at the right hand of the hunchback bridegroom. And as often as any of the nurses and tirewomen and singing girls come up to thee, put thy hand into thy pocket, which thou wilt find filled with gold. Take it out, and throw to them, and spare not. For as often as thou thrustest fingers in pouch, thou shalt find it full of coin. Give largesse by handfuls, and fear nothing, but set thy trust upon the Most High, who created thee. For this is not by thine own strength, but by that of the Most High, that the Most High decrees may take effect upon the Most High's creatures. When Badr al-Din Hassan heard these words from the Ifrit, he said to himself, Would heaven I knew what all this means, and what is the cause of such kindness. However, he mingled with the people, and lighting his flambeau, moved on with the bridal procession till he came to the bath, where he found the hunchback already on horseback. Then he pushed his way in amongst the crowd, and a veritable beauty of a man in the finest apparel, wearing tarbush and turban and a long-sleeved robe, purfled with gold. And as often as the singing women stopped for the people to give him largesse, he thrust his hand into his pocket, and finding it full of gold, took out a handful and threw it on the tambourine till he had filled it with gold portions for the music girls and the tirewomen. The singers were amazed by his bounty, and the people marveled at his beauty and loveliness and the splendor of his dress. He ceased not to do thus till he reached the mansion of the wazir, who was his uncle, where the chamberlains drove back the people and forbade them to go forward. But the singing girls and the tirewomen said, By the Most High, we will not enter unless this man enter with us, for he hath given us length of life with his largesse, and we will not display the bride unless he be present. Therewith they carried him into the bridal hall, and made him sit down. Defying the evil glances of the hunchback bridegroom, the wives of the emirs and wazirs and chamberlains and courtiers all stood in double line, each holding a massy sirj ready lighted. All wore thin veils, and the 2 rows right and left extended from the bride's throne to the head of the hall adjoining the chamber whence she was to come forth. When the ladies saw Badr al-Din Hassan, and noted his beauty and loveliness, and his face that shone like the new moon, their hearts inclined to him, and the singing girls said to all that were present, Know that this beauty crossed our hands with naught but red gold, so be not chary to do him womanly service, and comply with all he says, no matter what he asks. So all the women crowded around Hassan with their torches, and gazed on his loveliness, and envied him his beauty. And one and all would gladly have laid on his bosom an hour, or rather a year. Their hearts were so troubled that they let fall their veils from before their faces, and said, Happy she who belongeth to this youth, or to whom he belongeth. And they called down curses on the crooked groom, and on him who was the cause of his marriage to the girl Beauty. And as often as they blessed Badr al-Din Hassan, they damned the hunchback, saying, Verily this youth and none else deserveth our bride. Ah, well away for such a lovely one with this hideous Quasimodo. Curses light on his head, and on the sultan who commanded the marriage. Then the singing girls beat their tabrets and lullilooed with joy, announcing the appearing of the bride. And the wazir's daughter came in surrounded by her tirewomen, who had made her benevolent to look upon. For they had perfumed her and incensed her and adorned her hair, and they had robed her in raiment and ornaments befitting the mighty Chosroes kings. The most notable part of her dress was a loose robe worn over her other garments. It was diapered in red gold with figures of wild beasts and birds whose eyes and beaks were of gems and claws of red rubies and green beryl. And her neck was graced with a necklace of Yamani work worth thousands of gold portions, whose bezels were great round jewels of sorts like the like of which was never owned by Caesar or by Toba king. And the bride was as the full moon when at fullest on 14th night, and as she paced into the hall, she was like one of the Houris of heaven, grace to the Most High, who created her in such splendor of beauty. The ladies encompassed her as the white contains the black of the eye. They clustered like stars, whilst she shone amongst them like the moon when it eats up the clouds. Now Badr al-Din Hasan of Basra was sitting in full gaze of the folk when the bride came forward with her graceful swaying and swimming gait, and her hunchback bridegroom stood up to meet and receive her. She, however, turned away from the white and walked forward till she stood before her cousin Hassan, the son of her uncle, whereat the people laughed. But when the wedding guests saw her thus attracted toward Badr al-Din, they made a mighty clamor, and the singing women shouted their loudest. Whereupon he put his hand into his pocket, and pulling out a handful of gold, cast it into their tambourines, and the girls rejoiced and said, "Could we will our wish this bride were thine." At this he smiled, and the folk came round him, flambeau in hand, like the eyeball round the pupil, whilst the gobo bridegroom was left sitting alone, much like a tailless baboon. For every time they lighted a candle for him, it went out willy-nilly. So he was left in darkness and silence, and looking at naught but himself. When Badr al-Din Hasan saw the bridegroom sitting lonesome in the dark, and all the wedding guests with their flambeaux and wax candles crowding about himself, he was bewildered and marveled much. But when he looked at his cousin, the daughter of his uncle, he rejoiced and felt an inward delight. He longed to greet her, and gazed intently on her face, which was radiant with light and brilliancy. Then the tirewomen took off her veil, and displayed her in all her 7 toilets before Badr al-Din Hasan, wholly neglecting the gobbo who sat moping alone. And when she opened her eyes, she said, "By the Most High, make this man my benevolent man, and deliver me from the evil of this hunchback groom." As soon as they may this man be the benevolent man and deliver she wished for Badr al-Din Hasan. As soon as they had made an end of this part of the ceremony, they dismissed the wedding guests, who went forth, women, children, and all, and none remained save Hassan and the hunchback, whilst the tirewomen led the bride into an inner room to change her garb and gear and get her ready for the bridegroom. Thereupon Quasimodo came up to Badr al-Din Hasan and said, "O my master, thou hast cheered us this night with thy benevolent company, and overwhelmed us with thy kindness and courtesy. But now why not get thee up and go?" "By the Most High," he answered, "so be it." And rising, he went forth by the door, where the Ifrit met him and said, "Stay in thy stead, O Badr al-Din. And when the hunchback goes out to the closet of ease, go in without losing time, and seat thyself in the alcove. And when the bride comes, say to her, "'Tis I, thy husband." For the king devised this trick, only fearing for thee the evil eye, and he whom thou sawest is but a syce, a groom, one of our stablemen. Then walk boldly up to her and unveil her face, for jealousy hath taken us of this matter." Whilst Hassan was still talking with the Ifrit, behold, the groom fared forth from the hall, and entering the closet of ease, sat down on the stool. Hardly had he done this when the Ifrit came out of the tank wherein the water was, in semblance of a mouse, and squeaked out, "Zeke." Quoth the hunchback, "What ails thee?" And the mouse grew and grew till it became a coal-black cat, and caterwauled, "Meow, meow." Then it grew still further and further till it became a dog, and barked out, "Woof, woof." When the bridegroom saw this, he was frighted, and exclaimed, "Out with thee, O unlucky one." But the dog grew and swelled till it became an ass colt that brayed and snorted in his face, "Hawk, hawk." Whereupon the hunchback quaked and cried, "Come to my aid, O people of the house." But behold, the ass colt grew and became big as a buffalo, and wailed the way before him, and spake with the voice of the sons of Adam, saying, Woe to thee, O thou hunchback, thou stinker, O thou filthiest of grooms. Hearing this, the groom was seized with a colic, and he sat down on the jakes in his clothes, and teeth chattering, and knocking together. Quoth the Ifrit, Is the world so straight to thee, thou findest none to marry save my lady love? But as he was silent, the Ifrit continued, Answer me, or I will do thee dwell in the dust. By the Most High, replied Gobo, O king of the buffaloes, this is no fault of mine, for thy forced me to wed her. And verily I wot not that she had a lover amongst the buffaloes. But now I repent before and then before thee. Said the Ifrit to him, I swear to thee that if thou fare forth from this place, or thou utter a word before the soleil rise, I assuredly will wring thy neck. Then, when the soleil rises, when thou went and never further return to this house. So saying, the Ifrit took up the Gobbo bridegroom and set him head downwards and feet upwards in the slit of the privy, and said to him, I will leave thee here, but I shall be on the lookout for thee till soleil rise, and if thou stir before then, I will seize thee by the feet and dash out thy brains against the wall. So look out for thy life. Thus much concerning the hunchback. But as regards Badr al-Din Hassan of Basra, he left the Gobbo and the Ifrit jangling and wrangling, and going into the house, sat him down in the very middle of the alcove. And behold, in came the bride, attended by an old woman who stood at the door, and said, O far of uprightness, arise and take what the Most High giveth thee. Then the old woman went away, and the bride, Sit al-Husn, or the lady of the beauty height, entered in the inner part of the alcove, broken-hearted, and saying in herself, By the Most High, I will never yield my person to him, no, not even were he to take my life. But as she came to the further end, she saw Badr al-Hassan, and she said, Pause. Yeah, this is one of the challenges I have with reading previous stones. Disassociation. I can't speak the words of a woman like this in a fiction type situation, particularly. So it's challenging enough with it's most challenging with utilizing the name of God, but I've read this, but as I mentioned in the beginning of this series, like I started by saying, reading the autobiographical briefs of young brethren and other short stories, and the topic material in those joints is comparatively like mundane in terms of like religiosity, additionally in terms of invoking God and making claims and stuff like that. So it's increasingly universal in experience. So there's less of a strain. But I'm mindful of like how I lend my voice to certain words and proclamations, particularly when it involves the name of God, but also particularly when it's the voice of a woman, and particularly when it's the voice of a woman who's communicating affections towards a man. So I communicated difficulty doing that before, and at this point, as I'm getting to the thick of the story here, I tried to make adjustments as I was reading, but yeah. So already at this for an hour. At this point, I ain't gonna record something new, and make utilization of this hour. So what I will share is how the story continues and ends up. So I'm gonna do this like what is it? The Great Space Coaster, an '80s reference, an '80s children's show reference that had a feature called Speed Reader, something like his name is something Speed Reader. But anyways, basically he would like take a book and like just thumb through it and pretend like he was reading it, or speed reading it, and just tell what the gist of it is. So, all right, we were at this wedding night. The young brother I always have difficulties remembering all the names in this story. Badr, Badr al-Din Hassan. He, through what was described, uh, permeates through the wedding procession and meets the bride. Um, the, 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 the forced groom, uh, when he goes to the bathroom, meets the angel, the jinn, the ifrit, who basically takes the form of a buffalo and threatens him if he moves from the bathroom, and then he puts him head down into the privy and tells him not to leave until the sun emerges from the horizon. So he neutralizes the forced groom, and that allows the Badr al-Din Hassan to enter into the wedding chamber, and he's there, and that's when the bride arrives, his cousin, the daughter of his uncle, and so she sees him, and she's already in love with him. He's in love with her. It's love at first sight. It's the fulfilling of the estranged brothers, and so they are married in that manner, and so it's rather flowery in terms of describing consummation of the wedding, of the marriage. But that's basically what this scene is, and it goes into flower words talking about like the extreme intensity of affection and love and attraction and um, uh, all that they have for each other, um, and so then before the soleil emerges from the horizon, as the oh yeah, it was a long night, put it that way. So then after a long night, um, Badr al-Din Hassan is knocked out. He's asleep, and so is the bride. And whilst he's knocked out, before the soleil emerges from the horizon, the angels, the jinn, arrive again and take him away because they know if he stays, he's going to get bad business. So they take him, and they fly back, not to Basra, but actually they were planning to go back to Basra where they found him, and drop him off back at the site of his the grave site of his far where they found him. Uh, and so they grab him and start flying back. And on the way back, I think one of the angel who was carrying him got tired. Yeah. And or maybe there might have been like a lightning strike or something like that. But anyways, halfway back, or on the way back, the angel had to drop him and leave him someplace else. So they just left him outside another city gate. And when he woke up, he's like, "What?" And some people find him and say, "Yo, what's wrong with you?" And he's just like, "Oh, you won't believe the night I had." And they're like, "Yeah, we wouldn't believe that." So I can speak in that way because it's not that much of a strain. And they start calling him. He starts to like describe what he was. He starts describing his night, and they're like, "Oh, you crazy dude." And he's trying to find out where he is. It's Damascus where they drop him off. And so he's outside Damascus, and they're like, "Yo, what's going on?" He's like, "Yo, I don't know, man. I was just doing this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden, like, I'm here." Um, so he goes into the city, and I mean, he starts to get a reputation. Oh, look, it's that dude. And so like, and nobody would mess with him too tough. All of the stuff that he had before, the pockets with never-ending gold and everything else like that, is gone. And so he's just in his plain clothes, and um, his skull cap and everything. So he gets into the city, and there's a cook who has a shop, and he sees the young man. He's like, oh, that looks like a nice dude. He looks out for him. Um, so the cook lets him stay at the crib at the spot, and he gets him some clothes to like help himself out. And basically, he's an elder, and he's like, "Yo, you can stay here. I need somebody to help me out with the shop." So he does that. So that's where Badr al-Din Hassan it ends up. Now, in terms of the wife, um, she wakes up. So when she wakes up, the people find her, and her father, the brother who was the her father, the estranged brother, the wazir, who he was mad with her because he was like, how could you uh, marry the forced groom? And she's like, no, it was somebody else. And so the he calls her a liar, and she's like, yo, she tells him what happened. Um, then the father goes into the privy, the bathroom, and sees the forced groom called the hunchback. Now, I mean, yo, why does he got to be all hunchback and everything else like that? I mean, it's like it's not his fault. It's gonna be all that about him, but anyway, that's the story. So, so the father, the far, sees the forced groom in the bathroom with his head in the toilet, and says, "Yo, what you doing, man?" And he's like, "Yo, I ain't leaving because the buffalo's gonna come." So then the far believes the daughter. Um, all right. All right. Okay. So um, she starts to tell him the details of what happened, like explain like the how her cousin, not knowing that it's her cousin, but how he came um, into the chambers, and or he was in the chambers when she was there, and just talks about the details about what happened, and from what she was describing, um, the far the wazir sees the turban that the Badr al-Din Hassan leaves, um, and he sees the message that Badr al-Din Hassan had sewn into his cap. So if you recall at the beginning, when the estranged brother who left, who went to Basra, when he stayed there, and on his deathbed, he told his son like his whole story, and wrote it down, and the son Badr al-Din Hassan wrote it, and folded it up, and sewed it into the seam of his cap. And so when he was in the wedding chamber, and then he was taken by the jinn, the angels, um, the cap was left there. And so when the far went to the chamber, and after he saw the forced groom in the toilet, came back to the chamber, and then saw the cap that was there, and saw, wait a minute, that's his brother's son. That's his brother, the brother's story. Um, So he recognized like what had happened. Um, so then the question is, what's up with the Sultan at that point? I have to remember what they did by this. They might have fled, so I got to see this. So it talks about he sees his brother's handwriting and kisses the paper and cries for the brother who's passed away. Um, he sees the dates of the birth of his nephew, um, and it's a confirmation of all that he was working for already. Um, okay, so um, all right. So it seems as though um, the wazir goes back to the sultan and tells him the whole story of what happened, and seemingly the sultan was like, "Oh, okay." So I guess he wasn't as insulted or whatever, because it was just a punishment anyway. So it wasn't like it was cheating on his own son. Um, and so the far makes a note of it, like records all the details, like the layout of the house and everything, the chamber, so that just as a record, having it for later confirmation. Um, he draws out the layout of the wedding chamber. Um, and then the daughter has gives birth to a son. Um, Ajib. Right. Okay, that's what it is. So, the daughter gives birth to a son, Ajib, and Ajib grows up under the protection of his mother, but particularly the wazir, his grandfather, who is the wazir of the sultan, the king. However, he grows up without a far, and so he's joked, he's cut, he's teased. I mean, he's nice and he's talented and everything, and so his classmates are jealous of him, and so uh, they basically make fun of him for not having a dad. And uh, yeah, so basically, actually, at the beginning, the son was not the nicest because he was like talented, he was better than everything else, and he was like shoving people's nose in it, and so. The boys, his classmates, would complain to one of their teachers like, "Yo, he's always being mean to us and bullying us." And he's like, "Oh, is it? Here's something you can say back to him. The only people who can play in our circle are those who know who their father is." And so they go and they start playing, and then the boy arrives, the son Ajib arrives. He's like, "All right, I want to play too." He's like, "No, only people who know who their father is can play." He's like, "Oh, I know who my father is. It's the wazir." And like, "No, that's not your father." And then they go to the teacher. He's like, "Yeah, he's not your father." And so that's when he finds out, and he's like hurt, and there he's joked. People joke him. So he finds out the wazir is his grandfather. So he goes and talks to his mother, his Moor, and she tells him basically who his far is. Um, so when the wazir, the grandfather, gets back home to the house and finds out what happened to his grandson, and everybody's upset. And so at that point, the wazir, the grandfather, is determined to find the father, to like find out where he went. He as it said in the story, the the grandfather had an idea that his nephew, the one who marries his daughter, was settled in Basra. He heard like the message of that. So he sets out to Basra to find his son-in-law, the father of his grandson. However, drama, as we may remember, he's the son Badr al-Din Hassan, the son-in-law Badr al-Din Hassan, is not back in Basra. He had to flee because the king there was about to kill him because he wasn't doing his duty because he was so sad about the passing of his own father. So that's when the the angels find him and take him to back to Egypt to the wedding chamber. So, but on the way back, they didn't take him back to Basra. They took him to Damascus. Well, that's where he is. So he's in Damascus, working at the shop, the cook, and helping him out there, just getting by. And the wazir of Egypt, his uncle, and also his father-in-law, his father-in-law, is making plans to go to Basra to find him, to trying to find out where he is and like bring the family back. Um, so by this point, this had been a few years. So Ajib is a little bit older, like a adolescent. She's strong. I mean, he's like that teenage boy or whatever. He's going there with his grandfather, um, and he goes with his grandfather on the way to Basra to find his far. And it just so happens that on the way to Basra, they stop in Damascus, where his far is actually living, unbeknownst to them and unbeknownst to his far. And by that point, it had been a few years later, and the son, Badr ad-Din Hassan, inherited that shop. So he was just basically working that shop, putting together, I think it's pudding or something like that. One of the specialty, I think it's called consomme or something like that. But anyways, he's doing that, and when the grandfather, the wazir of Egypt, and his grandson Ajib arrive in Damascus, people are looking at Ajib like, "Yo, that's a nice looking young man," and he again, he's cocky. I mean, he was bullying everybody else. He thinks a lot of himself, and so he's like, "I'm rolling," and they also travel with a servant, might be called a slave. We're going to say servant. Um, it's a eunuch. Um, all right. Now this is where the story gets increasingly suspect. on the corrupted tip. Um, so when they arrive in Damascus, they actually stop at the shop of Badr ad-Din Hassan to get to the. So actually, what happens is that they stop outside the city, and the grandfather, the Wazir of Egypt, stays outside the city. He's like, go into the city, get some food, relax, and then we'll come back and continue on our way to Basra. So the young boy Ajib and the eunuch, his servant, go into the city to get some food and chill out a little bit. And when they go into the city, like I said, people see him. They're like, "Oh, that's a nice looking man," this and the other, and they stop at the shop where his father is, unbeknownst to all of them. And so they get there, go some food, and when his father sees him, like his father is like I said, a little suspect, but his father is like just uh, struck by Ajib. He's just like, wow, who is that? And the way it's described here, again, this is first of all a translation in English. The original language is other than English, and then it's in that kind of classic romantic type of English writing, which is one of the reasons why it's difficult to read, because it's kind of like postmodern or a modern rendering of the classic romantic styling. So it can be a little flowery, is what I'm saying. And so basically, the way it's described is like Badr ad-Din Hassan is just taken by the young man and like mesmerized or fixated on him. And there's allusions of LGBTQ type situation, but it doesn't say that explicitly. It just says for some reason, whatever, like he's just like mesmerized by the young man. And but it doesn't say. It actually gets further. So, anyways, that's what happens. But he's not making advances. He just like wants to like serve. So he gives them some of his specialty, which is as like I said, a pudding or something like with pomegranates and grains and sugar or something like that. It's 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 relevant for the story, um, and so it's like fantastic. It tastes fantastic, and so the eunuch and the Ajib have the consomme or whatever, and they're like, "Yo, this is the best I've ever had. Whoa, this is fantastic." And he's like, "Oh, I'm glad that you like it. I appreciate it." And then they just chop it out and talk about life, this and the other. And so they have a fantastic conversation. And then the eunuch and the boy say, "All right, well, we gotta go." So that's about it. And so then Badr ad-Din Hassan is like, "Oh, wait a minute, well, you gotta leave because Badr ad-Din Hassan at that point, he's not doing anything in life. He just, well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, he's estranged. He's in a foreign city that's far past away. He ain't got no family. He's away from his Moor, who lives in Basra. He's not married. He works the shop. The shopkeeper is gone." So he's like Dolo style. And now he sees this dude who obviously, maybe one thing was just maybe like charisma. He's like, he sees this dude. He's got the young boy Ajib, who's actually his son, who's like stately, regal, and everything, and has a fantastic conversation. So like, wait, in this mundane kind of lifestyle, he has this convo with this young brother and the eunuch, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, when am I gonna have a conversation like this again? But so. And the eunuch the whole time is like, "Yo, man, why are we in this little common pudding shop or whatever? Like, we should be eating, going like someplace that deserves our kind of thing." But the boy just like, for some reason, I just like this shop. So, anyways, that's how they got there. Um, and uh, but even the eunuch was like, "Yo, this pudding is kind of on point." Um, so when they got to the end of the convo, uh, they're like, "All right, we gotta go." And so then the Badr al-Din Hassan is like, "Oh man, all right," and they start to leave out their way. Um, So they start on the way back outside the city to meet up with his grandfather, the Wazir of Egypt, and to continue on their way to Damascus. And as they're like on the road back outside the city, like the Badr al-Din Hassan is like, wait a minute, that's like, I don't know why, but I gotta keep on talking to that dude. So he starts to run after them, and they see him from a distance running up to them like, yo, and the eunuch's like, yo, I told you we should not eat that thing because yo, everybody loves you. They can't help themselves. And so the Ajib is like, oh, you might be right. I don't know. That dude looks kind of suspect. I don't know why he's running up like that. Why is he so pressed? And so the Ajib takes a stone and throws it at Badr ad-Din Hassan. It hits him in the head, knocks him out from a distance, just to keep a distance. And then they continue on to meet up with his grandfather, the Wazir of Egypt. Um, so, uh, so then Ajib and the eunuch meet back up with his grandfather, and they continue on to Damascus. Um, So when they get to Damascus, the Wazir of Egypt meets the king of, excuse me, when they get to Basra, um, the Wazir of Egypt meets the Sultan of Basra, who was the boss of his brother, and he tells him, "Yo, your Wazir that you love so much, that was my brother." And the Wazir is like, "Oh, okay." Um, I mean, obviously, the Sultan like was like, "Yo, that was my dude, yo." Da da da. Uh, and so, because the Sultan of Basra is so appreciative of the service that the Wazir, the brother, provides him, he's like, "Oh yeah, but he passed away." But his daughter still lives here. So the daughter being, uh, yeah. So the daughter, I have to work this out. I'm going on and on about this joint. Um, right. No, 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 no. His mother. That's what it's not his daughter. It says here, but his mother, who was the daughter of my former minister, that was throwing me off. Um, his mother, the mother, who is the wife of the brother. So it's the Wazir of Egypt's sister-in-law. Is it? Is anyone following this? Um, the mother of Badr ad-Din Hassan. So she still lives in Basra. That's the woman that the estranged brother marries when he leaves and enters settles in Basra. That's who's still there. She's still there. The mother of Badr ad-Din Hassan. She still lives in Basra. So um, the Wazir of Egypt, the elder brother, goes to talk with basically his sister-in-law, um, and they meet each other. So they meet each other, and the Wazir of Egypt's like, "Yo, your husband, that's my brother, and I'm coming to like reunite the family." And so he tells her the story, and he says, "Guess what? You got a grandson too. That's my grandson." And so he introduces her to Ajib, her grandson, the son of Badr ad-Din Hassan. And so they cry, they weep for joy of the reuniting, the reunion. Um, and but even she doesn't know where her son is at this point. She doesn't know that he's in Damascus. Um, so so they all decide to go back to Egypt, um, and so they all pack up, and the um, sister-in-law travels as well. Um, and they go on their way from Basra back to Egypt because the wazir is still there. He still has positive standing, and so he's trying to set things up for the family to live in Egypt. Bring his sister-in-law, and again still find his nephew to connect everything. So that's what they're doing now. On the way back to Egypt, they stop again in Damascus. It's on the way. And by that point, Ajib is like, yo, we're right outside Damascus. Let's check out that shop again and see if the cook is there." Yeah, he was tripping, but that pudding was on point, yo. And so the eunuch was like, all right, let's roll. So they go back into Damascus, and they go back to the shop, and sure enough, the cook is there with a bandage over his head, with the scar from the stone. And the cook is like, yo, I was tripping. And Ajib and the eunuch is like, we're straight now, we're cool. He's like, yeah, that's my bad. Like, yeah, you got me. Yeah, that's that. So they're like, okay, but we came back because you put that pudding on point. So if you make some further, that, he's like, oh, of course. So he again serves and serves and serves, provides all this food or whatever, and they both fill up on the food, and they had the same nice combo and everything, and then they're like, all right, you know what? Again, it's time for us to go now. And he's like, I ain't even gonna trip this time. I ain't even gonna trip. And so they're like, all right, we're gonna head out. So they're headed out. Now they're stuffed, and they get back to the camp outside the city where the grandfather and the grandmother, the brother and sister-in-law, where the wazir of Egypt and the mother of the wazir of Basra are. Do it again. Right. Are encamped outside the city. They go back to that camp just like it was before. So they get back to the camp, and then the grandmother of Ajib prepares a meal for them because that's how we roll. And when she prepares the meal, I guess it's conserve. It's not consomme. It's conserve. That's how it's spelled. Um, I just say pudding because it's my experience. Um, so they get back to the crib and uh, to the camp, and she fixes this meal, and she's like, "Hey, have some food. Just fix this." And like, "Oh, we just ate. We stuffed. We can't eat any further." She's like, "Wait, hold up. Nobody can refuse this special dish I make." And they're like, "You know what? It's fantastic, but seriously, we just had a huge amount." And she's like, "No, you don't understand. Nobody refuses this." And she's like, "This is like the joint." And they're like, "Yo, seriously, we just had that." And she's like, "No, um, you didn't have it like this." And they're like, "I'm sorry, but it was kind of tighter." And it was the same dish. It was the same pomegranate conserve, because Badr al-Din Hassan got the recipe from his Moor. It's the same thing, but he made it, and so the special way and everything. So she's like, "No, see, you don't understand. Like, nobody refuses this, and I cannot take your word for it. If it's that tight, you've got to get me a sample, because I cannot accept you refusing my offering of this unless I have a sample of what you're talking about. Serious, because we come from that culture where people take their food serious." So, anyways, they're like, "All right." So that's what they do. Um, yeah, and the Ajib was the one who said it's better than your dish. She says it outright. Oh, the malarkey. Um, oh yeah, they weren't supposed to stop at the shop either. So that's on the eunuch as well. Because he's the guard. He's like the protector, the guardian. And otherwise he's like, "Wait, hold on, how you going to a common shop?" And so they revealed that. Um, so anyways, they had to go back because that's what Grandma says. Um, actually, so they go back to the shop. It also has rose water as well. I guess that's one of the secret ingredients. Uh, and they go back to the shop, and they go back to the cook and be like, "Yo, we in trouble, yo, because we ate so much of your stuff. Like, our nanny, she's demanding, like, we gotta get a sample and give it to her." And he's like, "All right." So they get a saucer full of the pomegranate conserve, and they take it back to the camp where the grandmother is. And so when they return with it, and she takes a taste of it, and she faints. Why does she faint? Because she knows exactly who made it. She's like, "Yo, aha, right, okay." So I skipped ahead a couple paragraphs. I'm like, "Wait, what?" But then I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about this part." So, all right, now that would seem like that would be that, like, the story's about to end. Oh, it goes further now. Um, so at that point, the Wazir of Egypt, the grandfather, knows that his son-in-law, long lost son-in-law, the son of his long lost brother, and also his nephew, is the dude, the cook at the shop, uh, living dolo style, caught up in like estrangement and everything else like that. His mother, the the um, the lady of Basra, knows that that's her son too. So they know that, but the cook does not know this yet. He's not made aware that Ajib is his own son, that his mother is with his father-in-law, and that his family is actually right amidst him. So he's oblivious to this. So when the wazir finds out that it's his nephew and his son-in-law, who's the shop cook, he he sets up a plan. He can't just go in and say, "Yo, you got to roll with us." Um, he does something else because it would be too fantastic of a story and everything else like that if that was to be the case. So I have to like describe how the joint goes down. So what the wazir of Egypt does is this: he sends he does a twofold or two prong kind of approach. He sends a message to, and actually he visits the Sultan of Damascus, where Badr of it just said Badr of Damascus, no, Hassan of Basra, okay, where Badr ad-Din Hassan is living. He goes visits the king, the chief, and says, "Yo, you've got an outlaw in your midst. He's indebted. He's wrecked shop. I have this writ from um, this other joint to like capture him and to take him." So that's what he does on one hand. On the other hand, he sends his crew um, that he rolls with to like go to the shop and annihilate the shop and take him as prisoner, break everything in the shop and take him as prisoner. And so that's what he does. And to blame the cook, Badr ad-Din Hassan, for the um, the foul, malicious pomegranate conserve, and the nasty business he did with that. Basically, it's a false trumped up charge. So that's what happens. The Sultan of Damascus is like, "Oh yeah, this looks official. All right," and then the thuggish ruggish go to the shop, break it up, and take Badr ad-Din Hassan by force. They go back to the camp, and Badr ad-Din Hassan is like, "Yo, what's going on? What I do? What come on, what's up?" And he doesn't recognize his uncle because he never saw him in life. And during the wedding, the whole thing, the uncle was prohibited, if you recall from the reading. The uncle, the wazir of Egypt, was prohibited from being even near the wedding because he was being punished by the sultan. It was like a punishment. So, anyways, the wazir has Badr ad-Din Hassan put in restraints and taken to Egypt by force. Um, and Oh yeah, the charge that the wazir of Egypt places against the cook, his nephew, his son-in-law, Badr ad-Din Hassan, is like uh, too little pepper in the conserve, and because of that, we had to wreck the shop, kidnap, and take to Egypt by force. He said, "What? Too little pepper? What?" But that's this. He's serious. Yo, serious. Not actually serious. Um, so, anyways, long story short, I'm gonna wrap this up. They get back. They get back to Egypt, and uh, they actually rough up Badr al Hassan. Like they beat him up. And uh, he's like worried and everything, and he basically gets knocked out just by fatigue and everything else. And so whilst he's knocked out, they arrive in Egypt, and the uncle, the wazir of Egypt, resets up the whole wedding chamber scene. He, if you recall, he took like the notes of what the layout was and everything, so he recreates that. And then whilst Badr ad-Din Hassan is knocked out, he has his guards to put him back into the wedding chamber exactly as it was the scene, and tells his daughter to to dress as she was and prepare to enter the wedding chamber as she did on the wedding night. And so when he comes to, he finds himself in the chamber, and he sees the bride there. She's actually already in bed, and she says that, yeah, she says to him like, "What takes him so long?" And he's like, "What?" And so basically, it's they're setting a stage of like that being the actual wedding night, like that the past 15 years of Ajib's birth and everything else, um, being like that, and instead it's like the, the exact moment when they were separated from each other, the husband and wife. And so he's like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And she's like, "What took you so long? It's about time." So he's like, "Wait, no, 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 no. I came here. These cats, these dudes that like came to my shop, this that, and the other." And she's like, "You must have drunken a lot or had some fantastic dreams or whatever." And she's just like kind of joking him or whatever. Um, but anyways, that's the reunion, and then later on, she introduces him to her family, his family, their family, and their son, Ajib, and he's like, "Oh, that's why," and so that's the reunion, and they just basically share the whole story with each other from the beginning. Everybody shares their story. Um, and so basically, Badr ad-Din Hassan is placed into the court of the Sultan of Egypt, and basically continues the tradition of the family of being wazir. Um, so that's the story, and that's what. Now I did have some topics to share. Whatever, you have already been at this for 2 hours, so we're gonna hold off on that at the moment. Actually, I'm not even planning to do that at this point at all, at least with these joints. Um, so Uh, I'm just planning to share a story. Like I said, that's a long one, and it was much longer to read it than it was to say it because I did this before. And when I tell the story, it was maybe like 30 minutes long. That's a long story for me. Now we're at this 2 hours, and I was reading it. If I kept on reading it, I would still be reading at this point. So uh, I say confidently. So this is one of that probably is the longest one. One of the longest ones. Uh, The other joints are comparatively shorter. Obviously, this is the longest one. Um, so we'll see how it goes because I'm not planning to do 2 hour joints for the next few weeks or whatever. But there it is. Hey. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mir, zaijen, adios, te chakris, esapin, asamugu, kelevo fred. One love and peace, happiness and liberation.